We're getting back on track here with Catherine and Emily, but as you know, we won't stay there for long because this is the Going Off Track podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I'm Catherine. That's not Emily because Emily had something come up. So Paul is back on the podcast. Welcome back.
Hi, Catherine. Well, I am glad to be back and hope everything is okay with Emily as she goes through her trials and tribulations.
Yes, she just had a little thing come up. She'll be back on our next episode, whenever that may be, Thursday for Saudi Arabia. She'll be back by then. But until then, we've got you. You watched the race this morning, as I did. We have lots of opinions. But before we dive into what happened during the race, I want to talk about what happened prior to the race with Sir Jackie Stewart.
And I was so excited to get up this morning to watch Sir Jackie Stewart, my favorite driver growing up, and watching him race his Tyrrell 006. And we got about 5 seconds of it, which was disappointing.
Yeah, there wasn't enough of it, but it was very cool that he was able to do that. He's 85 years old. Like, that's not easy to get into an F1 car at that age, even if it is, an F1 car that's from 1973.
Well, if you think that these cars are not comfortable, can you imagine what the comfort level was in 1973 with the lack of, support and the lack of safety measures? It wasn't easy. I am sure that he will be feeling that for a number of days, but it was all for a wonderful cause to help the Stewart's Race Against Dementia charity. And he got every single living world champion to sign his helmet so that they can auction it off. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool for a couple of reasons. Number one, and this was the question that you and I talked about during the week when they announced it, is one of the living champions is, of course, Michael Schumacher, who has not been seen publicly since his skiing accident in 2013. So the question was, how was he going to partake in this? But he had help from his wife, who assisted him in putting his signature on the helmet. So they did show a picture of like the part of the helmet where the MS is for his name, which I think is really great that the Schumacher family was willing to participate and that they were able to find a way to do it.
I agree. I think that it's just wonderful. And Sir Jackie has been such a wonderful ambassador for the sport of auto racing in general throughout the world for the past 50, 60 years that, it could not have be for a better organization and for a better cause.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is, when you think of the living world champions that signed it, there's only 20 of them in the 75-year history of Formula One. There's currently only 20 still living, and that feels like such a small number. And obviously, combining Schumacher and Hamilton, Vettel and Verstappen, that accounts for a pretty decent chunk of years with 14 plus 8, whatever that math
22.
is.
22.
Him too. So that's a good portion of it. And then everyone else is kind of scattered in there. So it's so interesting that there's only 20 still living in the 75th year of Formula One.
I think that the simple fact that they were able to get all 20 to participate is, it speaks for itself. And I think that it's, here again, I think it speaks to Sir Jackie for all the work that he has done to support Formula One and to support the causes that are important to him, because his family has been touched significantly by dementia. And, he's trying to, he's racing for a cure as quickly as he possibly can. So I think it's just, one of the more heartwarming pieces that I think that the broadcast could have spent more time on. I was actually very happy that they got a quick interview with him before the race started, because I think that his words match his deeds and actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who don't know, Stewart's his charity Race Against Dementia was founded when his wife was diagnosed with dementia. So that's where that side of it comes in. I'm going to assume that there will be something on like the YouTube with a longer piece from the F1 accounts, and probably from Sky will do something. So there will probably be more of that, and I think we'll also see more of this like historic car running type of stuff as we go throughout the season, as this is all thrown out for like the 75th year of Formula One and all the pageantry that we're going to see from that.
Yeah, I was truly hoping for a segment, but I'll take what I can get.
Pretty much. And then moving on to perhaps the 21st living champion, maybe. Oscar Piastri is the first repeat winner of the year. He went off and just he was gone. This is McLaren's first ever win in Bahrain, which is kind of shocking that they've never won in the 21-year history of this Grand Prix. And he was just gone, pretty much.
Yeah, he got a great start. His teammate got an even better start, but we'll talk about that later. And it was just a very dynamic first turn into turn two that could have spelled disaster for Oscar, but he came out very strong and with a great start, and he was gone. He was just out there, and he ran his race and did it very well.
Yeah, and I think it's really kind of funny for Oscar that like all of his race wins tend to be overshadowed by other things happening on track. Like his first ever race win in the Qatar Sprint in 2023 was when Max won the world championship. So like and they keep overshadowing things. He won in China. Lewis got everyone got disqualified. So there keeps being things that are overshadowing Oscar winning these races. There's backseat McLaren drama and the papaya orders for his win in Hungary, all these things. So it's just, I think it's so funny that like he wins this easy for him race. Of course, there was a lot of strategy involved, but it's like, oh, but here are 18 other things that we need to talk about, specifically George, who we're going to have to spend a few minutes on. So when Emily listens to this episode, be prepared. We're going to have to talk about George for a couple of minutes.
Yes, I know that's going the bane of her existence. But I think that this race was really keyed by not only the tire degradation, but technology degradation.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes, and that truly overshadowed what a great race Oscar ran, because there was truly no catching him, and
Yeah,
there was
and
no one that was really even after the
safety car.
Thank you. Even after the safety car, he was gone again. He went early, which is contrary to what a lot of other people say. You want to get up to the line and then hit the floor, but he went early and he ran for it.
Yeah, and I think it really shows. And the safety car was so interesting because the safety car was for debris removal, which is totally an understandable reason for a safety car, even though we are so accustomed to expecting a safety car for something more dramatic, like a crash, and not just debris, which of course is Rui Marquez making up for the what was it, Vegas, when he didn't deploy the safety car when there was a wing mirror that Valtteri Bottas ran over, and it caused all sorts of problems, and it was a hot mess, which the episode is linked above, and I had lots of opinions that day on it. So Marquez learned his lesson, and you're right. Oscar was able to he took complete control of the restart. He was just gone. Nothing ever really phases him, but nothing phased him today at all.
That is very true. And I think that, because of the technology issues that were there, which we'll talk about in a minute with George Russell, I think that really affected the race presentation, because while all of this was going on and you were having drivers with track limit issues, and I don't think that everyone was able to use their technology to their advantage, both personally and within the race, because they were having trouble gauging distances. So you run into these, run into these technical problems that are just, you know, very difficult to overcome. I mean, I think that there were more track limit issues in this race than there have been in the last 20.
Um, Probably. I mean, that one race in Austria really stands out as like the track limit problems race. But
Yep.
I mean, I think it's one thing to have issues with track limits. It's another thing to have the issues that we saw today with DRS, which let's move into talking about George, because George, he survived having a ton of gremlins in his car, including like losing brake by wire, which is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the most, obviously the most notable thing, and especially from like watching the broadcast perspective, was George's car transponder, which tells everyone where the car is on the track, was on the fritz the entire race. He wasn't recording sector times. And then if you watched on like the live timing or on F1 TV on the data channel, you would see George dropping down all the way back to P20 and then all of a sudden popping back up over and over and over, because his transponder worked in certain parts of the track but then not in others, which, as the biggest problem, screwed up his ability to use his DRS.
Yes, and that's you know that's really it. When you're using your DRS, for a track, especially because you've done all this sim work on the track, for this track, you get into a rhythm and you understand what is supposed to be, when it's supposed to be used and when it's not supposed to be used. And when you get a call, and I think this was for George, when they said, don't use it until we tell you to use it.
That was for George. And then there was another one that was actually Lando being told, don't use it unless you're sure that
Correct.
you're
Yes.
within that second. So this was, to that point, this was not a George issue. This was a DRS for the entire field issue, which we didn't know was foreshadowing during qualifying, but that's what happened to Liam Lawson during qualifying, which is why one of the reasons why he didn't make it out of Q1 was because his DRS flap closed in the middle of his hot lap. And so he lost that time, which hindered him out of potentially getting out of Q2.
Right. And,
Or out of
when you
Q1 into Q2.
into Q2, right. And when you have situations where, you're told to use your backup radio button and oops.
It deploys your DRS when you're not supposed to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the other things, about that is, yes, George was having issues with his DRS, but he also didn't need it because he wasn't anywhere near Oscar ahead of him. He was at least 2 seconds out in the latter half of the race. And then, even that, it would have taken him till after the end of the race to catch up with him.
Yes.
But it is against the sporting code to deploy your DRS when you are not in DRS range of the car ahead. And the only reason why George wasn't impacted by it and wasn't given a penalty and has, as of recording, been able to hold on to P2 is the FIA told Mercedes to have George use his backup DRS button, which is also the backup radio button. So
right.
He accidentally opened the DRS mechanism, the flap, and when he was trying to radio his race engineer instead, because that steering wheel is exceedingly complicated, so he backed off the throttle to close it, lost time, and actually lost a significant amount of time compared to what he gained. According to the FIA, from the article that I read, he gained only 0.02 seconds, but to compensate, he lost 0.28. So he lost almost 0.3 at that next corner while having Lando Norris on his butt.
Yep.
To compensate, to not be penalized for this incident, which I think is fair, and I think he handled it correctly and appropriately.
I agree. And, while I did not see the article that you saw, I did see his interview after the race. And he admitted that here's what happened. And, but he had compensated enough that he actually did not gain any advantage in time or space, which is important because he was competing with Lando.
Right.
If he was in no man's land, I don't think anybody would have cared. If he was
Yeah,
way between both of the McLarens, I don't think anybody would have worried about it. But because he was so close and he was within DRS for Lando, that became an issue. And
right.
since that's not, since he, took it upon himself to make the correction, I think good on him. And, you let it go, and let's see if the FIA can figure out what the problems were with DRS before they get to Saudi Arabia.
That would be nice. And this is actually not the first time that this specific incident has happened. What George went through with the DRS issues that everyone really went through, because I think there was a point where they also said Charles didn't have the available DRS, and Charles needed his DRS, which was another big problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the last time this happened was actually in Baku in 2018, where it impacted Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll, and Kevin Magnussen, who were all ultimately cleared. So this is one of these rare moments where the FIA understands that they have precedence and uses precedence appropriately. So good for them.
Thank you, yes, to the FIA for actually doing what needs to be done.
Yes. And then to round out the podium, Lando Norris, I think Lando really, this was not his best weekend, but I think this really shows the difference between Lando on his worst day versus Oscar on his best day. There's a really big gap between the two of them when you have that situation. And then even when Lando's on one of his best days and Oscar's on one of his best days, there's still that gap where Oscar, I feel, is ahead of him.
I would agree with that. I think that Lando had a very disappointing quali, and he had a very disappointing free practice. Could not get a feel for the car at all. And it really showed when he, qualified in sixth.
Yeah.
And that's just, that's not necessarily what we have come to expect especially over the last, this early part of this season, but the second half of last season. He was always at the front. He was always competitive. He was always making, pushing Max to, especially in the second half of last season. So to have him qualify sixth and be that disappointing, the expectations, I think, were lower. And with the oops that he had because his, he jump started. Yes. So it's, that taken into account, he was still able to make up that 5-second penalty and be competitive and get on the podium. So it was really a really good race for Lando.
Yeah, it was a very strong showing. Obviously, they wanted the 1-2. They got a 1-3. Which is what they should have gotten in Japan. But
Right.
I think it also goes to show that Lando will still make mistakes, and Lando was able to overcome those mistakes today, but I don't think he's always going to be. There's been kind of foreshadowing that McLaren's pace is going to kind of, if not take a step back, but will be met by the rest of the field in and around Spain and once F1 moves into Europe. So I think that it will make the mistakes that Lando makes more glaring and more difficult for him to overcome as the season goes on. And he may have started out the season as the favorite for the championship, but I really don't think he is going to be the favorite for the championship once we get a better picture of what the race is going to look like in a few races.
One of the things I think you're beginning to see here is if you look at the in-race demeanor of certain drivers, they are, they are very calm, matter of fact. You hear Max talk about, he's got no braking, or he's not, happy with the car for some reason. That's because he's so in touch with his vehicle. He knows what he's expecting it to feel like. Oscar is a lot like that. He's very even keeled. And if he makes a mistake, he can compartmentalize it and he moves on from it. I'm not sure that Lando has that ability to compartmentalize it in the time frame he needs to actually recover from things like lockups and overtaking and making the apex. He's not. It rides on him maybe for a lap or two, where for a lot of other drivers, even Fernando, he's out there, he's running his race, he's very even keeled, and will ends up being much more consistent over the long period of time of the race.
Right, which is what you need to do. And it's really going to be interesting to see how things play out with the McLarens. Obviously, in the predictions episode, Emily and I talked about how, like, all Oscar needs to do is qualify ahead of Lando, and he will be set. And I think that this is kind of going to be that starting point. We'll see how things go next week in Saudi Arabia as we end the triple header, but I think it's going to be really interesting, especially between the two of them, and also especially because there's only 3 points between them now in the drivers' championship standings.
And this also brings to the question, what happens if you're starting the race and say Lando is P1 and Oscar is P2, but Oscar has more pace.
Well, like we discussed in last week's episode, the answer is McLaren will, to their detriment, keep Lando ahead, and that's where Oscar's job of making sure he qualifies ahead of Lando is going to come into play. And they're not going to overtly say, when they're going to be, having the papaya rules, kick in, but it won't be until like the latter half of the season when they know which of their two drivers is going to be the more viable championship option.
It's kind of first world problems, but they have to be very attuned to how, things are shaking out during a race week, because the last thing they want to do is end up like Ferrari, where, decisions are being made that are detrimental not only to one driver, but to both drivers.
Yes, and to speak on Ferrari, in the top 5 of the current drivers' standings, Charles is 5th right now, which, all well and good, he's got 14 more drivers behind him, but he's 5th with 32 points. George in P4 has almost double. He has 63. And George has been eating up podiums left and right this season. He's definitely going to be a contender for the World Championship this year. Max is currently in P3. And, however, I think that Max is severely underplaying his chances in a lot of ways. But yeah, Ferrari has a lot of ground that they need to recover. Obviously, they had the double disqualification in China, but Ferrari's got some work to do if they want either or both of their drivers to be in the mix for this. Obviously, It's early; it's only race 4, but also
very. Yes. And Lewis has admitted, I think, that they are still working on their communication.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that he didn't have to worry about when he was at Mercedes.
Right, exactly. And so Ferrari they have jumped ahead there in P4 in the championship right now, ahead of Haas and Williams and Aston Martin and VCarb. Alpine got on the board finally. They have points. And then, of course, Stake is chilling in the back. But McLaren has a very solid lead on the Constructors' Championship right now with 151 points. They're the only team in triple digits right now. So they've got a very solid cushion ahead of, Mercedes and Red Bull. And it's very early, but this is, from a constructor standpoint, it's a sign of things to come.
I agree with you, but with the advent of having 4 different drivers in 4 races who were at pole, there are going to be more surprises, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a Hulkenberg or a Sainz P1 at some of these races. I mean, with Alpine, Pierre Gasly ran a great race to get the points that he got.
Yeah, he ran a great race, and he managed to keep Max behind him all the way up until the finish line, when Max was like, you know what, I actually want that position Pierre. So
Yes.
that was pretty impressive of Pierre to do. Obviously, we always forget that Alpine exists, but Alpine had a relatively decent weekend on both sides. We'll talk about Jack Doohan in a minute, but to talk about who else impressed, and I think the most impressive non-podium finisher and finisher in the latter half of the points really has to be Ollie Behrman, because he recovered from a terrible experience in qualifying, went from P20 to finish in the points in P10. And I think that really signals that he's not in the best car on the grid, but he is still one of the most capable rookies that we have on the grid right now.
I agree with you, and you combine that, I like the fact, with all of the rookies that we have. I think we have 6 rookies,
Give or take.
give or take Liam Lawson. But we have all of these rookies, and to watch the rookies as they develop, that is really that's really a lot of fun, because that creates the opportunity for new fans and for new, really different experiences. One question I do have, though, with the constructors, this is probably the first time, I think, in the last 4 seasons that every constructor has points.
At this time of year, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it has been more common in the Drive to Survive era of Formula One for a team to maybe not have points. But even this last year, when with Stake as awful as they were, Stake was able to steal a couple of points thanks to Zhou Guanyu. But yeah, this I think it is early that we have everybody has points on the board accounted for them. On the driver's side, not yet, but
Of course.
we'll get there. But to speak about points, Yuki Tsunoda has helped. I said that his experience in the Red Bull would be incremental improvements, and he did that today. He managed to make it into the points also after a really bad qualifying, and helped give Red Bull their first double points since Vegas 2024. So Yuki is not there yet, but he's still improving in a way that I don't think Lawson would have been able to do had Lawson still been in the car.
It seems to be that way, and whether you are a Liam Lawson fan or not a Liam Lawson fan, as the Red Bull expert on this podcast, I think that it is. Incremental steps, baby steps will get you where you're going. And Yuki showed today that he could be competitive when he needed to be.
Yeah, and I also think it helps that he had a Red Bull strategy and not a V-Carb or a Racing Bull strategy today, since we know that the Racing Bull strategy has been a little suspect this season.
Yes.
So
yes.
We'll see how he continues to improve, but double points is where you want your drivers to be, so that you're not just relying on the 4-time world champion to bring home all of your points.
Right. And then we come to Alpine.
Yeah, so usually we do who else impressed and who disappointed. Jack Doohan was really kind of in the middle for me today, because I feel like he's had one of his better weekends. While unfortunately not finished, like he was running in the points for a lot of the race, unfortunately ended up in P15 thanks to a penalty, but he made it out of Q1 for the first time in qualifying. He looked pretty good. Obviously FP1 doesn't matter, but he looked good in FP1, and he's looked a lot better than he has in the first couple of races. I think that he might be settling into the car. Of course, Flavio is going to be ready to yank him out at the second he can, but I do think that this weekend allowed him to kind of put in a stay of execution, so to speak.
If you're looking at it from the standpoint of, did he improve his penalty aside, the answer is absolutely yes. Did he get out of Q1 for the first time this season? Absolutely yes. Is that enough to stave off the Flavio execution? Probably not, but we'll know. We'll probably know after Saudi Arabia where he's going to end up.
Yeah. So the answer is we'll see, but I don't hate what I saw out of Jack Doohan this weekend. So I think that I think that's a good sign for him. Obviously, he's probably the one driver that isn't named Liam Lawson who's under the most pressure on the grid to perform in a way that he really shouldn't have to be under, whereas Lawson was rightfully under that pressure. So I think that this is a good sign from him.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. Now, on the subject of who disappointed,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, well, you know, the wunderkind of Mercedes, Kimi Antonelli, who was, thought to be, possibly the next savant of Formula One racing, maybe human after all.
I mean, yes, and I really do think that this was a questionable strategy rather than him having a rookie moment. And he will have a rookie moment at some point this season where he'll do something like he did in his, testing appearances last year. Like he'll spin and do something, not so smart. But they put him on a three-strap strategy that 100% just did not work. And, to qualify P5 and to finish out of the points, not where you want to be, especially when you have, all of us assuming that one day he's going to outpace George, and then George just keeps, finishing on podium.
Yeah, yeah. It was not pretty. And I know that, there were well, at least I believe that there were a lot of teams out there that were going to really try to do one-stop strategies. Um, I
Nope.
think that the safety car played into that, but the three-stop strategy that was never going to work, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
Now let's talk about someone else who disappointed,
Well,
and
I don't
we
think it
come
was
back.
really him disappointing, but his situation was disappointing.
Yes, I mean, we're back on the skid block issue again. So I guess this should make Lewis feel better, but I don't think it makes anybody feel better.
Yeah, so Nico Hulkenberg got dinged with a skid block strike, and so he is now the third driver from the third separate team to be disqualified because of a skid block issue. Obviously, the first two were Lewis Hamilton and Pierre Gasly in China, and when we were talking about that, Emily was asking about what the regulation was, and I didn't remember, but I looked it up this time. So,
Good.
so for Emily, so the regulation is the skid block has to be 10 millimeters thick, give or take 0.2 millimeters, with 9 millimeters accepted due to wear. So that is the range. And Emily was like, well, there should be a range and a margin of error. There is a margin of error. Nico Hulkenberg's skid block at the end of the race was 8.4 millimeters on the left and right, and 8.5 millimeters on the center, which is half a millimeter at minimum under the 9 millimeters of accepted wear. So understandable, but also endemic of a bigger problem that we have here.
And to think about this, Hulk was selected at random to be inspected, part of which is, inspecting these skid blocks. Now, that is, and I don't know how many drivers get inspected each time, but it's, this is going to, if this is the problem that has become the new porpoising, that's going to be a significant issue, especially with the tracks that need additional downforce.
Right.
And when you've got a lot of downforce, and especially with this track, which is older than I think three of the drivers.
The tarmac is older than Ollie
right.
Behrman and Kimi Antonelli. So this track is old and has not been resurfaced, which is why we have so much tire degradation.
Exactly.
And under car wear. But the skid block issue is very cut and dry, but it does mean that this could be a pretty common disqualification that we're going to see throughout the season. And if that keeps happening, I think the teams are going to come together to, campaign for a rules change, because the fact that we've seen this 3 times in one season where we I think the last time we had a disqualification for a reason otherwise was when Sebastian Vettel got disqualified when he was still at Aston Martin because he wasn't able to come up with an adequate fuel sample following a race. So like this is not an issue we should be seeing as much as we have in 4 races.
I agree with you. And the real question that comes to my mind is, with the new regulations and the new cars for next season, are strike plates going to be a problem with those cars?
That
Because
is a question.
they are lighter and their width is smaller. So, they may require more downforce. So as a result of that, are you just setting yourself up for additional disaster by creating, these problems when you may not need to have these issues come up on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if more teams get dinged. So TBA on this. Obviously, this doesn't really mean much because Nico Hulkenberg finished out of the points. So whatever. Gabriel Bortoletto, his teammate, advanced up one. But yeah, this could be interesting, and this could also have bigger implications, especially if we have cars that finish further up the points, like when we had the Ferrari ding a couple of races ago.
Yeah. Right. And speaking of disappointing, who was the driver of the day again?
For some reason, the fans who voted deemed it to be the man who started 9th and finished 5th instead of the man who started 20th and finished 10th. So it was Lewis Hamilton. Which honestly, I'm shocked it wasn't Lando Norris because it's usually Lando Norris. But I think it's funny that we have had 2 races this season out of 4 where Martin Brundle and David Croft have lightly questioned the decision making of the driver of the day voters. The first time was when Kimi Antonelli started 8th and finished 8th, and then today with Lewis. But it's like I think that there were other drivers who made better performances. That's like picking Max to be driver of the day when he started 7th and finished 6th.
Exactly. Now, I do want to just go off track for just a moment, and I want to give a big shout out to David Croft, who did a marvelous job when the technology was working against him and really turned his television play-by-play for the race into a radio play-by-play and really gave great information and kept people abreast of where George Russell actually was and who was in the top 10 during the race, so that people could follow, even though all of the graphics on the broadcast were compromised. So Crofty did a fantastic job.
Yeah, that was challenging. I remember being very confused on the restart from the safety car and watching George tumble and being like, what just happened to George? What did he do to screw up? But then he didn't. So yeah, it was very, they did a very good job of making sure that we knew where people were. And they also, had the leaderboard and that they would pop up with the top 10 just to show you where the points finishers was, even though it was static. It was better than nothing. So they think that they managed that pretty well.
Yeah, and both David and Martin were having a very difficult time because when the safety car was called for, there was usually there's video of stewards actually cleaning up debris. You never saw that on the broadcast.
Or there would just be some sort of note saying, this is why the safety car is being deployed. Like usually, like I said earlier, we have a safety car and we have more obvious reasons why we have a safety car and not, half of Carlos Sainz's poor side pod just kind of was strewn about everywhere.
Exactly. And because there was no video, Martin was just as confused as all of us.
Yeah. But like I said, even I think Martin was the one who said it, that had a piece of debris cut into a tire, that could have been even more disastrous and would have caused even bigger problems. So the FIA did get that right.
Oh, without question. It just, from a broadcast perspective, you have that lack of information gets certain people wondering.
Yeah, exactly. And also we've been going long, but to go back to Nico Hulkenberg, we had that incident in qualifying where Nico Hulkenberg was deemed to be out of track limits in Q1 at the
Right.
end of Q2, which screwed with Alex Albon, who should have been advanced into Q2 but was out in Q1, and the FIA shockingly admitted that they had got it wrong.
Yes, yes. Well, there's a first time for everything.
I mean, a stop clock is right twice a day, but they were able to do that, and kind of I think they knew that eyes were on them after the qualifying kerfuffle, and they admitted that they didn't think that the turn where Nico Hulkenberg breached track limits, which I believe was turn 11, was going to be significant throughout the weekend. So they kind of admitted that they were like, oh, and he breached it, but it was like 45 minutes after.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Better never than late.
I guess.
Yeah.
And speaking of never, we are never going to do well in our predictions. Mine and Emily's predictions were we got a point each today. So there's that. So to run through our predictions really quickly, pole position, we picked Oscar. Oscar did it. So we each get a point. Our podium, I chose Oscar, Lando, Charles, which I wasn't that far off, to be fair. And
True.
Emily chose Max, Oscar, Lando, which was a little further off when the real podium was Oscar, George, and Lando. And then for P10, I had Yuki, who finished in P9, so I'll take it. And Emily had Isaac Hadjar, who didn't have the best of days, the best of weekends. And the real P10 was Ollie Behrman. So the current standings in the Emily versus Catherine predictions season 25, whatever the heck we're calling this, is I have 2 points and Emily has 1 point.
Well, it's still early in the season, and like it happened last year, you'll get one right, and that'll be you'll just someone will be off to the races.
Yeah, not that I am ever excited for Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia is where I went correct on all predictions. So maybe we'll be able to do that again next week. And then for biggest surprise, my biggest surprise was Haas was going to get double points, and they did. So I get credit
Yeah.
from that. Emily said Williams would get double points, and they very much did not, which is unfortunate. So sorry, Emily. And then for who's going to do a dumb, we both picked George. And the answer was George's car tried really, really hard to make it happen. And also his transponder tried really, really hard to make it happen. But he managed to survive and keep his P2. So no to the both of us. And maybe next week I won't forget for my big oops of the weekend.
Well, now it becomes an issue because DRS was I think a system-wide issue. So does this open up the who's going to do a dumb? Does that mean it's
Is it
the
just
FIA?
the DRS?
It could be the FIA and the technology out there.
I think this is the tinfoil hat here. This is like the precursor to them justifying getting rid of DRS in next year's regulation.
Absolutely, I could not agree with you more.
Yeah. So final thoughts. I think that this race was. I mean, Suzuka was not a banger, and I don't think this necessarily was a banger either, but this was a very intriguing race purely because everyone, including every driver on a separate team, was running like a different strategy. So there was a lot of intrigue to this race that I think was overshadowed by the technology issues.
I absolutely agree. I think that compared to Suzuka, which was a snoozer, you had this is for a strategy geeks like us who are really interested in all of the nuances of sports. When you get to tire degradation, and I truly believe that when Max went in for his first pit, which was a terrible pit stop, by the way. But when he went in for hard, and there was a technology issue there too.
Yes, there was, because his stop go lights were not working, so he had to be told that he was allowed to leave his pit box, which
Exactly.
was another problem. But
Right.
Also, to speak about Max's pit stop issue, one of them was legitimate because they couldn't get the right front off of the second one. But
Right.
I do think that Red Bull is still without their top two pit stop guys who were not in Suzuka as well because they were back in the UK for a family emergency. So I think that Red Bull is still dealing with the fact that they don't have their best pit stop guys on right now, which is not an
That may
excuse, but is one of the reasons why I think they're struggling with pit stops.
that may be true, but if you looked at Yuki's last pit stop, it was 2.2 seconds.
Oh,
Where
so they
Max's
got it. They
two
got
pit
it
stops
back.
were 4.7 and 6.2.
Right.
So you had, when they got it right, they got it right. But there were significant issues, and they also ignored the fact that there was a yellow light or a red blinking light in their stop go, and they had no unsafe release issues. There was no one near them.
Right.
So, but getting back to my point, tire degradation was the word of the day, and virtually everyone had a different strategy, even between teams.
Right.
Because James Vowles even said, "Are you going to go with the hard tire?" And they're like, "Well, we don't think so."
Yeah, James was great, and he's like, "Yeah, you'll see. We've got and he Carlos was in the middle of overtaking Yuki, and he's like, just watch this right here." And I love when James Vowles is on with Sky. Like he can do that every week. I don't need Zach Brown. Just give me every week of James Vowles, please.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next up,
We are going to Saudi Arabia. We are wrapping up the triple header in, of course, the race that I think should be first off the calendar, but that is not my decision. But we will go to Saudi Arabia. Hopefully, it's exciting. We will have F1 Academy back next week as well, so we will have them to talk about. And yeah, this has been our deep dive into everything that happened during the Bahrain Grand Prix. Thanks for going off track with us, guys.
have fun.